Folks. Welcome to an episode of the Artenders with Mac and Dan. I am Dan. He is Mac.
Hi.
Hello. So, Mac, how
No more
are you?
howdy. No more howdy.
Howdy.
I'm getting rid of it. It got made fun of recently.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really? Because you're a cowboy?
Well, I'm a cowboy. Yeah, I'm a cowboy. And I think that it was the realization that the radio personality that I've accrued over the past year and a half was not real.
Well, because we're just enhanced characters of ourselves
exactly.
in order to put on
even
this
though I felt
show.
howdy's not what I portray. Howdy's not what I actually give off.
Wow.
And so I was called for fraudulence, I think is what it was. But Danny, how are you? Are you okay?
I'm all right. I'm all right.
Good,
Not too bad. Not too shabby.
So we get into a couple
a couple of things. Of things. This wonderful, art review show where we, consume art and then we discuss it. That's just a very blanket term of what we do for this podcast in order to get a better understanding of what we do and how we do it. And a few things we need to get ahead of on the docket. A couple of things. One, now, because we have introduced penalty points, Mac, if you could demonstrate to the viewing audience our wonderful whiteboard that we've constructed.
Filibuster for me.
We are essentially keeping tally of the penalty points that we have. And we're going to actually add one in just a moment. So I currently have 2. Mac has 1. After episode, at the end of episode 59 is when we will, tally them all up and, select a costume for one of us to wear from Party City. Whoever has
Which I know exactly
more
what's
points
gonna be.
has
I know
to
exactly
suffer.
what's going to be.
Now, with that being said, because of this new implementation of corrections, there are some corrections that need to be made that are indicative of a penalty point whenever a penalty is induced. We'll talk about whatever point that is. And some kid outside is getting very excited. Good for them.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
It is. It is a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
So why do you deserve a point?
Because as our sleeper pick, essentially a pick that is going to take a while to finish, but we just kind of put to the side and eventually get around to it, instead of doing a back and forth. It is a game called Outer Wilds. Mac, last week I called it The Outer Wilds. That is just wholly incorrect. It is not the name of the game, and therefore I deserve a penalty point.
Danny, how dare you?
And then with
There's no way I would have ever noticed that.
We also talked about, this isn't indicative of any point whatsoever, but I did want to revisit this, that the guy who plays Ulrich in the television series Dark, the 2019 Ulrich, Oliver Mansucci, is indeed Italian.
Yeah, I kind of got a tight butthole moment whenever that happened last week, but I was confident. I knew. All
right.
Because I was trying to look for people that we could interview, and he was one of the only non-German people. It was like him and Jonas, and he's Italian, so
I see.
He wasn't much help.
Well, I mean, his father is from Italy, but I imagine it's the case of he identifies as an Italian, as a German human being,
right.
Being born in Germany.
German human being.
Then some current events details. This is kind of a new segment. We're gonna see how this works, how this translates. Where during this season, in whatever respective season, whenever there's something interesting that happens, in regards to one of the arts that we have consumed, we may mention it very briefly. So this is in reference to when we reviewed The U, the ESPN 30 for 30 film, as well as part 2 of The U. We talked about how, particularly in part 2, that Manny Diaz was the coach of the University of Miami. That is no longer the case. Now Mario Cristobal, who was a part of those crazy, the U days, is now the head coach, and he used to coach for Oregon. This only really cares for people who are actually involved, but I figured this is a good idea to sort of adopt the idea that art is fluid, art is growing, and there are always things happening in relation to the art that we are making, and I felt that this is relevant enough due to the fact of the sort of interesting situation that happened. The
fluid job.
Yeah,
recently.
And I also made the prediction that I don't think the University of Miami will ever be back to what it was in those glory days, and maybe this is indicative of a change that could be coming.
That'd be really cool. So, and also I know that we always have an instinct to not date the show and keep it something that people a review that stands the test of time.
Yeah.
But I think there's also is kind of a beauty, what you're saying, a kind of beauty to acknowledging the piece for what it is in its time.
Yeah. And then also acknowledging how it changes over time.
Right.
A little bit of a segue into what we're reviewing. Finally, it took us long enough. We'll get better at this, we promise.
No.
This time.
That might have been a record timing for an intro for us.
I mean, in terms of like length, yes. It is a comedy special done by a comedian, a purple comedian. His name is Randy Feltface, and Randy Feltface is a puppet.
Yes, he is.
It is his comedy special, Purple Privilege.
Mm-hmm.
It was recorded. Actually, I think it was recorded in 2020. I want to say in 2020.
He says 2020 several times.
So probably 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Randy Feltface is a puppet that is controlled or inhibited, or not inhibited, but inhabited, let's say, by this man named Heath McAvor, I believe his name is pronounced. This special covers present time Randy, and then also Randy from like 2018 when he was in New York, and 7-year-old Randy as well. And once again, the follow-up question is, but Danny, this is a puppet. Yes. Like, we that is the interesting premise, but it's immediately put aside as to in order to serve Randy as a human being.
And it's made pretty clear, at least I think, that that Randy is just an extension of Heath, who is controlling.
Sure,
the puppet.
but Randy never acknowledges Heath is controlling him.
Right.
This is not like a Jeff Dunham situation.
You're right. I was about to mention
Jeff Dunham.
It's impossible not to talk about Jeff Dunham with this.
Is probably the most famous American ventriloquist. I think
I would say
that's pretty
safe.
fair to say, at least in the past 20 years.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, he had comedy specials as well, and he was a ventriloquist on stage, but he was there with the puppets. And so then he would have conversations with the puppets. So the puppets would be their own characters, sometimes acknowledge that, like Jeff is controlling them, but Jeff and the puppet is having an active dialogue, and he had like different characters as well, as opposed to Randy Feltface, where the comedy special is just the puppet. Like, it's just the character.
Yeah.
It's not Heath McAvor at all. He is not a presence that is mentioned, that is regarded to, in any way alluded to. It is strictly just a Randy Feltface performance. Like, if you're going into a Jeff Dunham show, it's not Jeff Dunham and blah, blah, blah. No. You're going to a Jeff Dunham show. You're not going to a Heath McAvor show. You are going to a Randy Feltface show.
Right. And also, it's interesting that... because at first you're like, oh, this is a puppet show, right?
Yeah.
But I would go as far as to say it's not. By any means a puppet show. It's regular-ass stand-up comedy, but it just happens to be a puppet.
Yes.
Like, everything that happened could have just as easily been done with a regular dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so. And I think that also plays into... We'll talk about this more, of course, but some of the problems that I had with this stand-up. But I want to get into your first impressions, Mac. So I imagine you hadn't heard of Randy Feltface prior to me mentioning it. Neither had I for a while. I just kind of stumbled upon some
how
clips.
did you find it?
There were just some YouTube clips that were recommended to me.
YouTube recommended it.
And I was like, how interesting can this be? I just I pulled one up, and it's just, it is a puppet doing stand-up. And the clips that I saw were fantastic, right? Yeah. And so that got me interested in...
Was there any reused material from the show that you saw?
No, I don't think I saw a clip from this past stand-up in what I saw. Not that I can remember. Not that I can think of. But, Mac, what were your first impressions of this stand-up? And I guess, what were, the first things that, really jumped at you? Was there anything in particular that you feel like is worth mentioning in regards to your first impressions?
Yeah, so I would say that I am to stand-up as you are to video games, in that
I see
a similar amount of time that you have spent playing video games in your life, which we can say is a...
Considerable.
Absolutely.
For literally as long as I can remember.
Yeah, whenever we review video games and we talk about video games, I do kind of... allow you to take over, because I'm like, oh, I know that you know a lot about video games that I just could never. I have spent an inordinate amount of time in my life watching stand-up. I know, there's, and it's not even the science of stand-up necessarily. It's more just I've just consumed so much of it.
Sure.
And it did fascinate me that it took me about 5 minutes to understand that I needed to be looking at this like any other stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
Like there was nothing different really other than...
What did you think was going to be different about this comedian?
Self-awareness, I think. Okay. I thought that it was going to be acknowledged that this was a puppet, but then I realized that it was just a guy.
Yeah.
And that... and there was kind of a beauty about that because in a similar way to... I mean, really all the most successful like ventriloquists, or if we're looking at like Sesame Street or the Muppets, more the Muppets than Sesame Street. Whenever you're watching it, there is a certain lull in the middle where you forget that it's that there's a person operating it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where like it takes
you're
you a couple
just
minutes.
listening to the words and like you're just responding to what's being said. And,
right.
And yeah,
to the point where I casually, as we were setting up for this episode, would refer to this stand-up comedian as Randy.
Yeah.
Because it's Randy.
It is Randy.
But at the same time, it's as a puppet.
Yeah. But it's funny because like I think if I'm not mistaken, like Randy Feltface is one of the most famous Australian comedians that if we go to Australia and say, hey, name 5 comedians, Randy would probably be one of them. And they
Hilarious.
would I think they would just refer to him as Randy.
Yeah.
And you would just know, you know?
Yeah, right. Well, and then it kind of begs the question, which I still don't have a complete answer to, so all we can do is recklessly speculate.
Oh, this is reckless speculation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, why not? It wasn't planned, but this is just off the dome.
You're riffing.
I'm riffing. The next question is, why exactly is there a puppet?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do you need one? Why can't it just be Heath?
I will say I don't think this is a sizzle serve. I think if you had put this entire stand-up just in a human form instead of a puppet form, it'd be profoundly mediocre, boring, sad, and you would walk out halfway through.
Uh-huh.
I think what makes this so interesting is the consistent physical manifestation of this puppet and this puppet's exploration of his very limited space that I think is what makes this a treat.
Right.
In my personal opinion.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Also, it's that what is so spectacular about it, I think, is that because we now have a programmed understanding of what a puppet looks like and how a puppet operates, partially through our experience with puppets, like Jeff Dunham, like Sesame Street, like the Muppets, or even animated TV shows. We know the what a puppet's supposed to look like. That it is even interesting. It is even more interesting for Randy Feltface to be a regular ass dude,
but to have such, I mean, and this is a testament to Heath's like physical performance of Randy,
which I still am very curious about.
It seems like Heath has like 4 arms. Like
right.
I don't know. I
have no idea how he does
have no idea how he controls this. It's
magic.
Insane.
It's absolute magic. Whenever he starts like, especially with audience interactions and talking to people, that I was shocked and impressed by. I don't know how you do that.
But it's the exploration of this puppet as if he were a human with the consistent human mannerisms that Randy has is part of the charm. It's also part of the charm of like, in terms of like puppet design, it's so simple, it's perfect. It is a perfect puppet design. There's not a lot of detail going on, no hair, no nothing special like that, no facial hair, nothing like that. Maybe just like a shirt on and just big old bulging eyes, no eyelids or nothing. And it's this like lavender sort of purple that he has going on. And that's it. And that's all you need.
It's a very barren puppet.
So, exactly. So what it's relying on more is the performance.
Right.
And it's allowing you to like see that this is like human enough, but you never forget that's a puppet because of some of those caricatures, right? Like it's not designed to look like a human, but what makes it so special is how it acts like a human.
Right.
Which is awesome. And so then it goes into those audience interactions, which I thought was some of the best parts of the special itself.
I thought so too.
Was especially when he leads off the audience interaction with, hey, what's your name? I'm looking down an aisle, aren't I? And so, because of course he cannot see that he's looking down an aisle, and so there's just this dead silence of this puppet just like staring, and those gigantic eyes just silently, and just and that, but it's Heath having that realization through the apparatus that is Randy. That I think is what leads the stand-up to its most special moments, is when Heath is having the realization through the apparatus of Randy, and it's the exploration with Randy, as opposed to, for a lot of parts of this stand-up, it's meticulously set up, and that's what I actually found to be some of the weakest parts.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think Randy, let's just say Randy, is the greatest storyteller.
I agree.
And I don't think you go to a Randy show for the storytelling. Mind you, like, he alludes to Hannah Gadsby, and you don't watch a stand-up, then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, there's a message to this. I wasn't, I'm not here for the message. But there's a certain level of execution that needs to be met that I don't think Randy met. And so there's a good chunk of this stand-up as well that he's literally just riffing and making noises, and it's like, it doesn't feel like you know what you're doing, and it doesn't feel like this joke was really deconstructed or constructed well enough for it to really stand on its own. And I'm not sure, for a large part of it, like, I don't even know what is the reaction, and I think part of it too is that we're not Australian. I think some of the jokes do go over our head, and that doesn't help necessarily.
Yeah, there were a couple terms that I didn't quite understand, or things that just culturally they find funnier than I find. Yeah.
I think what it is that I love the physical manifestation of Randy, but the vocal manifestation, and there was a constant yelling that I felt like it appeased to a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Like somebody in middle school, with that crazy humor, right? I don't think is comedy that is particularly well manifested and well constructed. With that being said, stand-up is, if not like the hardest artistic thing you could do,
truly,
period. Because it's the most vulnerable. It's the most vulnerable you could ever be, aside from being naked on stage. I would much rather personally be naked on stage than do a stand-up comedy show.
But also, I mean, the adrenaline must be unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
Whenever you're taking a look at the show, I think that there are two routes that you can go in terms of comparison and in terms of trying to study it in relation to the things around it or things that are similar to it. And so I think because Randy clearly wants to be viewed as just another stand-up comedian,
right? I
think we might as well take a look at it in that way.
Yeah.
And the first person that comes to mind is Daniel Sloss.
Okay.
Daniel Sloss, I think, also does the screaming thing, also is similarly animated, has very similar like vocal rhythms and patterns. And if you can feel whenever he feels like a joke isn't landing and he starts to rely on his exit strategies. Does that make any sense? Like,
go on.
If he knows that he's coming to the end of a joke and he doesn't have the audience exactly where he wants them, then it's kind of insecurity, but it's just like he will rely on the screams. He will rely on a random act of comedy or a senseless act of comedy rather than a actual planned joke. So like, and that's just what you get from the audience, and you can definitely tell that not Randy but Heath is doing the same thing. That like if he feels like he's coming to the end of a joke and it's not as funny as he was expecting it to be, then he'll start relying on the 12-year-old shit.
And that felt like it happened a lot during this show.
Yeah,
and like it's conjunction of that with like I think relatively poor storytelling.
Yes.
I think did not serve Randy any favors.
And what I think is actually hilarious is that what served Randy Feltface more than the humanity that he provided as this puppet and what's the word?
I don't
personification.
Know. Okay. I mean, just like, what's the word? Thanks for like throwing any bone at me.
The humanity of the inanimate object.
Yeah, sure.
What served him even more than that was the awareness he had of his profound mediocrity, and that he was willing to make fun of himself from the get-go. The fact that his first 5 minutes were about how hard he bombed earlier that day is, I think, really smart.
That is good. That is good.
Yeah, but it's difficult to me because in the same way that he relies on his exit strategies like Daniel Sloss does, the problem is that Daniel Sloss just does it so much better. You know what I mean? Like, there are so many things that I found quite similar between Daniel Sloss and Randy Feltface. Partially, it was the exit strategies, but another big one is that they would tell stories that were not particularly funny stories.
Mm-hmm.
And they would rely on their commentary on the story to be funny rather than the story itself.
Right.
So there was like around the 80s with George Carlin, there was a huge split, like 70s, 80s, huge split between two types of comics. Because originally a comedian wasn't necessarily a theater maker. A comedian was just a person standing on stage, right?
Right.
And we'll talk about the theater maker aspect in a sec, I think. But whenever you're talking about just the stand-up comedian standing on a stage, there's a split. And it is the people that are telling jokes, like the Jerry Seinfelds, which they're more theater-like and more written and planned approach to comedy, caters towards more of a Seinfeld-type show, which is why that ended up being more successful than Jerry Seinfeld's actual stand-up comedy.
Right.
I'm safe to assume that you've never actually seen Jerry Seinfeld stand-up, but have seen plenty of clips or references to Seinfeld the show.
Yeah, I've watched episodes of Seinfeld.
Right.
I may have watched Jerry Seinfeld doing stand-up a collective like 3 minutes.
Exactly. Right. And that's most of America. And that's because it caters towards more of the Seinfeld's type.
Mm-hmm.
But the large split is that there are storytelling comedians and there are one-liner or planned like minimal joke comedians, right?
Yes.
And so that's a big split. But then also within storytelling comedians, there was another split with, I would say, John Mulaney is probably where it happened. Not him by himself, but around that time period, like 2014, 15, where the split was, wait a minute, do I have to tell a story that has a point? Do I have to tell a story that, like, the end, like the last moment of the story is funny? Or can it just be a random story that's funny along the way? And John Mulaney, for the most part, tells stories that have a funny moment at the end, but there are a couple stories that he has that don't have an ending, and they don't have a clear arc.
Yeah, but the journey is so enjoyable
that you don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like the John Mulaney talking about the homeless person that came up to him and was, I'm gay, I have AIDS, I'm new in town. Right? That the end of that story is not funny, and I don't think anyone really even remembers the end of the story because the middle is so damn funny.
Yeah.
And I think Randy Feltface is in that genre of stand-up comedian, of senseless stories that don't quite have an ending, but the journey is fun.
Yeah.
The problem is the journey's not fun enough yet.
Yeah. It's definitely not polished enough. That back to the Seinfeld thing, I genuinely think at the present moment that I feel like Randy is better served if he did like a sketch comedy show, for example. Like if he did a Chappelle show style sort of thing where it's like this one sketch is focusing on this like one joke and then we're just going to fully explore this entire joke. And then what would lend to that show is the fact that, or like even something like Curb Your Enthusiasm, of if it's a puppet going through these experiences, but it's a puppet going through human experiences and acknowledging it as a human, but also partially, I'm a puppet, but like not enough to really change the course of events.
Yeah, and clearly you can really tell that one thing that's been consistently getting in Randy Feltface's way of blowing up and becoming like a huge sensation. Like he talks a lot about how he's like not quite like he's too famous to go back to doing anything else, but he's not famous enough to actually make a name for himself.
Yeah.
I think that what has kept him there, and he says this several times, is that he doesn't like the structure and that he's not willing to lie. And so he isn't willing to make up a sob story for himself to get more famous on like a reality TV show type thing, or like be acknowledged as an actual person,
Right.
But also he's not willing to like adhere to a structure that would keep him to something like a, you know, like a variety show. And so Curb Your Enthusiasm was an excellent example. I think Louis is also a pretty decent example,
Right.
like of his show. But even more so, Portlandia is one that I'm thinking of. That would make a lot of, like, literally no structure whatsoever. You can do whatever the fuck you want.
Because what would be, this is just me, right? This is just my sensibilities, I suppose is the word. But like, what would be interesting to me is A, seeing a puppet go through that experience, and B, seeing Randy go through that experience, right?
Yeah.
That, like, I do enjoy Randy the character.
Me too.
Right? But I think what makes Randy so much more interesting is when he is just going through those experiences, and it's not like Heath is writing the character. It's just, I guess it always falls back for me, those physical manifestations of like, put Randy in those situations as opposed to like trying to force something to come out of Randy. If that makes sense.
Right.
That's a very roundabout way.
Well, but that kind of gets back to your point of the best parts of the special by a landslide were the moments that were not a part of the theater, like that were not planned, the storytelling aspects.
Right.
It was the audience interactions. Yeah. Like I would say one of my favorite parts of the show, I wouldn't say like number one, but one of my favorite parts of the show was whenever he was talking to that guy, and he was like, "What have you done today?" The guy was like, "Nothing." And he was like, "You gotta give me something." It's like, I can't just do nothing here. Please, anything. And then he's like,
but what's
just
funny
the way he
is
dissects
that's such a profoundly human experience done through a puppet.
Right. And that is what made it funny.
With the physical manifestation of a puppet.
If that was a regular guy, I would have felt kind of bad for him. And I would have laughed because I felt bad. I was laughing with Randy because you're right. It was so human. One thing that I want to talk about before we go to a little break is that now that we've taken a look at it in comparison to other comics that are the storytelling comics, I think I kind of want to look at it in terms of its storytelling aspects. Because even though he succeeds more as a comic than a theater maker.
Nice.
Thank you.
For those of you who weren't watching, Mac had a burp and he turned away. I'm so proud of him.
And I controlled the fuck out of it.
Thank God. It only took like a year and a half.
We're
finally here.
Train me like a dog. You have to make up a game to make sure I don't do it anymore. It's the truth. This game is ingrained in me. But I want to take a look at Randy Feltface from the perspective of a theater maker, because that is really what it was at its core.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that when we get back from a word from our sponsor.
Sweet.
All right, and we're back at the Artenders.
Howdy.
Ow. That's one of my intros. Me and Danny's intros are very different. His should be at the beginning, and mine makes a little more sense in the mid. Good for you. Good for you keeping that water bottle away from the mic.
Yeah, it's very loud to open this water bottle, so just in case, I put it away. That was
a good move. Real pro. So we were going to start this section of the podcast off talking a little bit about the theater making aspects, of Randy Feltface. That my first instinct is to go to the stand-up comedians that have also been much more theater makers than they have been stand-up comedians. So, for instance, to name a few there, like that would be Jeff Dunham. Obviously, is a pretty good example of that.
Yeah.
Another big one would be Oh Hello with John Mulaney and Nick Kroll.
Oh my God, that's right. Mac, you've been meaning to show me that for years. I completely forgot.
You still have never seen that? Danny, you've still never seen it? You're kidding. Danny, oh my God. How many times have I talked about this shit? I thought by now you have. I eventually let it go and distance myself because I thought you had seen it. Have you still not fucking seen it? Well, now I have the perfect opportunity to fucking make you watch it. Oh my God. I'm so mad at you, Danny. Shit, still. Have we ever talked about this on the show before? We must have, at least once.
No, never. I don't think so. Maybe you
God
may have alluded to this. Okay, so like, I mean, years ago, like when Mac and I went to school together for college, he would just, I mean, we're talking like months.
Yeah.
Months. Like he was like, "Hey, have you seen Oh Hello? Hey, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Have you seen this?"
And I got everybody to watch it. I got everybody to watch it multiple times too.
Yeah.
Gosh.
I think I watched the first like 30 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it was because it's not, I don't know.
I have no idea either.
It was never, I don't know. I don't know why I never watched it. Now at this point, now that I'm far.
Well, now I get to force you. Thank God. Okay. You're going to watch it soon. Don't worry.
I'm happy that my, like, expressing that vulnerability per se, I was able to exploit some content.
Oh yeah. No, you.
Score for me,
honestly. You got me. You got me in a place. You sent me, reeling.
Darling.
As they might say. Oh my God, I love that song. Anyway, sorry. So we're talking about, Oh Hello is another good example, right?
I just like how I said darling, and you're like, oh, I just sent you.
You did.
Darling,
again.
you sent me.
Oh
Hello, theater maker.
Oh Hello. Another big one would be Bo Burnham. Bo Burnham.
Like I just said. Not to be confused with Bo. The anime show.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Wow, I have a deep cut. Sorry, I'm actively playing defense.
No, you're good. Actively playing defense.
I will stop getting in your way.
That's good. So Bo Burnham, Oh Hello, and then the other big one is James Acaster, which I haven't really talked a lot about on the show, but I think is really worth mentioning now. And I might actually, I think that was one of the ones that I wanted to show you pretty soon here, because he has such a tight show in terms of every single word is intentional, so intentional. He will have, in the same way we talked about MF Doom, and how much meaning there is in every choice that he makes,
the meticulous nature of it,
right? I would say there is a similar amount of detail in James Acaster stand-up. And that's not to say that he's the funniest comedian, but I'm willing to say that he's really revolutionized the structure, and that he is really changing the way that I see stand-up, at least.
Yeah. Well, in the way that, like, James Acaster, he's a pretty young guy.
Very young, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And
like,
he is...
This is an active change that is happening, not like he is in the act of, we presume to be revolutionary.
Right.
Like, it's one of those, like, we're in the moment
of
it.
James Acaster and Bo Burnham have both gone on record talking about how the comedians and the history that they draw the most from is absurdist comedy.
Yeah.
Like, is this weird, out there, does not make sense, hard to follow comedy. And
we're going to get more of probably, Bo Burnham, James Acaster-esque work in the next 10, 20 years.
Oh, big time. And you can definitely tell that there is a huge need for that recently, and plenty of demand. And now that those two especially have shown kind of a groundwork, like a starting place that people can start editing now. I think that's what's so interesting and exciting about James Acaster, is not necessarily that what he has currently is so remarkable. It's that he has set a new level one that we can build on.
Yeah.
But James Acaster will have groups of specials. So rather than and Daniel Sloss does the same thing, but rather than having one special that lasts an hour, which is the standard and like the HBO classic,
it's
right?
what Randy does in this.
It's what Randy does. It's the standard stand-up.
Yeah.
Or rather than having like a comedy series, he has a collection of comedy specials that he will put under the same umbrella and ask you to watch in succession, like together.
Yeah.
But there'll be different experiences altogether.
But there's a sort of like thematic string tying it all together.
And James Acaster, in the same way that MF Doom does it, he will have setups for punchlines in his first show.
Oh my God.
That he will randomly capitalize on. And so much so to the point where, and it's phenomenally impressive, he will have a setup in his very, very first show that legitimately 2.5 hours of viewing later, and in real time for the audience, they will only know if they watched his other ones.
It's amazing.
he will
and
have
like
setups
actively
for,
remember it too.
yes, setups that, and it's not even like a little like inside joke for the people that know. It's like his special will hinge. This joke will hinge on you having watched the previous specials.
Yeah.
And we'll set up hours later. We'll get a punchline hours later, and it's impressive.
Yeah.
So these people that are theater type comedians, that are really getting to the meat of a storytelling comedy special.
Yeah.
I don't think Randy was able to really hit on the head for quite a couple reasons.
And so, like, to give a little bit more
Yeah.
context into that, as well as to us as the viewers in regards to Randy, that this is the only special that we have seen of Randy.
Right.
We have not seen any previous special. I think you and I have both seen clips from other specials that he has done now. But we have not seen any previous special. Now, he does allude to, in this particular special, Purple Privilege, he does allude to one that he did in 2018. I believe it's called Randy Writes a Book. And he talks about, like, the show, like Randy right after, like, that show's performance. And so I talked about it at the very beginning of this episode, but how this particular stand-up is constructed is that it's Randy in the present talking to the audience, and then there's Randy in 2018 just telling the story, and then there's Randy as 7 years old, and, you know, all going through these experiences. But I think what would really lead into the effectiveness of 2018 Randy was if we saw Randy Writes a Book, and we didn't. But I think it's one of those cases that, maybe this would have been a lot more interesting, because I hadn't thought of that, but maybe this would have been a lot more interesting if we had seen Randy Writes a Book first, or at least like some other stand-up of his first, as opposed to consuming Purple Privilege first. But I had a similar experience with Daniel Sloss, for example, where I saw his special X, which is on HBO, and he seemed to constantly allude to, like, his other, I think one other special that he talked about his sister, I believe.
Yeah.
And he was talking about that one a lot, but it didn't feel like I needed that special to, like, get this one, per se. I think it would have helped, but I think, in my personal opinion, what really missed in the storytelling of Randy's Purple Privilege was the fact that we didn't see Randy Writes a Book. And I think he was relying on that a lot, as opposed to allowing himself to carve his own space in this own special.
Ironically enough, the special that you're talking about of Daniel Sloss's, and I was making sure that this was the case because of the rules, is actually called Dark.
It's called Dark?
Dark, yeah.
It's not called X?
No. You're correct. It is X.
Christ.
But no. X was referring to another special of his that you were talking about.
Yes.
We talked about his sister, and the sister one was Dark.
Okay. Well, yeah, it was Dark.
That's why it's called that. Yeah. And
do I need to filibuster a little bit more?
No. I do have a thought. Sorry, getting back to it. We're skipping around in this segment. I like it.
The audience can see that you're having the thought experience. It's a little bit different on an auditory medium.
Sure. I'll.
Do we count hitting the table?
No. I
close one.
I think that's a cover-upable mistake.
Well, I mean, technically, this is, a peek behind the curtain, folks. Because I use noise gates, I'm not going to bother explaining noise gates, but because I use noise gates, that means that some of the, like, the dings and the dongs and the coughs and maybe a sneeze, like, is not picked up by the microphones. However, I mean, we're still gonna, respond to it. So, all the same.
Yeah. A BTS of the show would actually be kind of interesting, I think.
Wow. The boy band?
Yeah. Yeah. Getting the K-pop stars to talk about this show would be
awesome. Would be incredible.
Yeah, but besides that, I mean the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyways.
Randy Feltface was I think where he went wrong.
Yeah.
And the issue for him is that he did have blackouts, set changes,
right,
costume changes.
That's true.
Scenes.
It wasn't really costume changes. Just
different.
Yeah, I mean, if like it's very clear, like Randy sort of performs on top of this gigantic box.
Yeah, right.
Essentially, one can assume Heath is standing inside this box.
Right.
So there are blackouts, so Heath can run over to another box, and then it's a different Randy in a different costume.
Yeah, and it's cute and it's endearing.
Yeah.
But doing this makes it such that there is a storytelling aspect to the show that goes further than a person standing there telling a story.
Yeah.
And it is like we're being taken on this adventure. And so his job now is to paint the picture for us. You know what I mean? It's like to take us on this journey with him.
Right.
And although I think that, and I think we might differ here, I actually do think that Randy is a very excellent wordsmith. And I think that his adjectives and the way that he explains things are really interesting and fun to listen to.
I'm with you.
It's more that his stories just kind of pitter on, and it doesn't feel like he knows what the funny parts are.
Exactly.
Does that make any sense?
I'm with you there precisely. And then that becomes what we were talking about in the last segment of when you eject on the story or a joke and then you just riff your own thing.
Right. That happened one too many times. And I feel like
and it happened like multiple times.
Yeah. I feel like if you know, and this is less about testing material with audiences and more about just the comedian themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The Heath. Is that it's largely about, do you know what's actually funny about the thing that you're saying?
Yeah. And so, like, for example, there are even some parts too where this is a little bit of a like a side of a segue, but Randy makes a couple of like super let's say on the border jokes, right? Like on the border of being okay, you know, in regards to like race or like ableism, for example.
Yes.
Where the issue that like, I don't want to be the arbiter on this sort of thing, because I think, even though some people may disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine, and I understand, I don't think comedians should be beholden to any rules per se on what jokes they can or can't make.
Uh-huh.
But I do feel like, hey, like if you are going to make or construct a joke that is about race or ethnicity or creed or like, you know, sexuality, ableism, anything like that, then there's first of all, that joke has to be original, and then at the very least, if it's not original, then it has to speak to a larger point. And
that's one thing that Dave Chappelle's really good about.
And that's for the most part. I know he caught some flack in this last stand-up, but I can't attest to this last stand-up that he put on Netflix. I don't even know what it's called. And I know he caught some flack for that when it came to transgender. But for the most part, yeah, or like Daniel Sloss, for example. Or I think like Hannah Gadsby is fantastic, who Randy talks about. But I don't think Randy addressed it enough in this particular special. He does bring up, you know, the quote that I luckily wrote down in one of these pages. Don't even know where I wrote it down. That's amazing. I am the best at writing notes.
What was it about specifically?
But it was in regards to privilege and the fact that like privilege is not, you know, things being given to you. Privilege is the lack of obstacles.
Yeah.
If you have more privilege, you have less obstacles in front of you. And I never felt like he tied some of those jokes to that point.
Thank you. I felt like he literally just added that one quote, which is an excellent little tidbit. Little soundbite. It's awesome, but
felt so disjointed
like
from everything else.
Only inserted to justify the title.
Yep. To justify the title and to justify him making those jokes, even though did not. If he did, sure, but I don't think he tied them enough.
Yeah.
Or I mean, I never caught that he tied them. I'll just say that. Maybe that's my fault.
No. I had the exact same experience. I have no idea why.
Yeah, I'm willing to occupy the space of like, hey, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I did miss that. But on my first viewing of this subject, that was my experience.
Yeah.
Where it felt like you were just making those jokes for the sake of making those jokes, and we're allowed to forgive it a little bit more because, haha, it's a puppet making those jokes. It's the same thing as like Avenue Q, that musical where like everybody's a little bit racist, and it's silly because it's a bunch of puppets doing that.
So it's like, are they actual races, or is it like it's puppets. Like none of them have any cultural tie to or history to make anything they're saying wrong or right, because there is no culture or race attached to puppets.
And once again, I don't want to be the arbiter of like, you can't make those jokes. Because also, I'm not a comedian. I'm not a stand-up comedian. I know this stuff is hard. And that's why, partially, I don't bother doing this stuff, because I know how difficult it is. And also because I don't have the passion for it, but also largely because I can't. But those, just simply doing those jokes are tired.
Yeah.
And you have to do more with those jokes, simply because like just to belittle someone is not funny enough anymore.
Right.
There's has to be either some form of originality and or ties to a larger point.
Sure. I just want to say one thing on that Dave Chappelle special that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to do like a whole episode on it or whatever, but I did watch that with my family. Not the whole family.
The one that came out relatively recently.
Yes, yeah, I'm trying to find the title right now.
You're trying to find the title?
Yeah.
Okay, so I need a filibuster for you? What's going on here?
No,
okay, very good.
Dang, I know.
Excellent analysis.
It has something to do with it has something to do with the it's like The Last Stand or something. I'm not gonna go.
It just came out. Just
no, I know it. The
Wikipedia
closer.
Page.
That's it. The closer.
Okay. Mariano Rivera.
Yes, I knew you're gonna have some baseball joke. Okay. The closer. I watched it with my dad and my brothers, and we had a really interesting conversation about what we thought of the special. And the only reason we watched it is because we did read a bunch of articles on people just fucking torching Dave Chappelle. And we were like, okay, well, Dave Chappelle's not an absolute idiot, so like I want to see what he had to say, right?
Yeah.
So we watched it, and this is where I think he went wrong. Because every single point, and similar to the Chappelle Show, similar to every special that he's made so far, whatever joke he is making and whoever he is making fun of, it is for the ultimate purpose of making a point, almost always about race.
Yeah.
And it's been done masterfully every single time.
Yeah.
This last time, the reason that it was sort of lost in translation, and the reason that there were quite a few people that were pretty upset, is actually, I don't think it was his. In my opinion, it had nothing to do with his actual beliefs, in terms of the LGBTQ plus or transgender community. Although he said some like pretty insensitive things in terms of like what he believes about them, I don't think that any of those things were out of color or out of pocket, I guess is the term. It's more that he was using a transgender / LGBTQ plus avenue to make his points on race.
Yeah.
Which was where it became problematic.
Weird. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, well, if we're
like,
going to talk about this,
you can understand where he's trying to get to, but like you can question the path that he takes.
Yeah, and it's largely because you're like, wait a second, I don't think that we should be minimizing those problems in order to shed light on these problems. Sure.
And then, like, that's a fair criticism, and like people are open to like it. I mean, we know people who don't like it. We even know transgender people who do like that stand up.
Right.
So,
And that's what one of the big points that he makes is that he's like the biggest fan of this stand-up special that I'm giving you right now was this transgender person that tells this whole story.
But you see how he pushes the envelope so much because he is the one that built that envelope in the first place.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
not necessarily. I'm giving him a lot of credit there, but
he is definitely a master of the form and was revolutionary because of that.
And then to such a degree to tie it to Randy.
That's where Randy lands.
I mean, well, like, okay, we are comparing Randy to one of the greatest comedians of our time.
Yeah.
Totally unfair.
True.
Totally unfair.
True. But at the same time, if you're going to, and I mean, Randy is asking us to do that whenever Randy makes such difficult jokes or jokes that are tricky. You know what I mean? Like, there are so many times whenever Dave Chappelle has talked about things that are tricky, and you go in thinking it's about to be bad, and then you come out the other side like, that was kind of smart. That was a fun time.
But there was never a moment in the show where I'm like, oh, that was smart.
No.
The closest that it was to it was
was it Last Joke?
But it was not necessarily the last joke when he was telling the story of how he got kicked off the set for the reality show.
I thought that was
fun. What I liked more, the only story that worked for me truly was when he was talking about that family or like the guy who ran this lead company. That was the only. I mean, it's the details are already starting.
Was that the one where at the end he was like,
his son or his nephew burned down the whole house?
Yeah, and he was like, wow. Who gives a fuck?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. Yeah.
Well, that felt like it was the only. I don't know. Like, it was just one of those few things that like it actually worked.
You were like,
me.
You got me. I was with you. With you. Yeah.
But so much of the show, I mean, when you're talking about like, we're also trying to make an hour worth of content for this hour-long comedy special.
Oh, so we kind of have to talk about comedy as a whole rather than just the.
Yeah. So like, it's a little bit difficult for us too, but it's even more difficult when it's just like. Man, but half that special, like, got to be worked on in some degree.
Yeah.
And, like, even bigger of an issue when some of our favorite parts of the show was when Randy wasn't doing anything that he wrote. That it was just straight up interacting with the audience.
Yeah, right.
And, like, so, like, even, like, the opening and the closing song, I'm like, these are fine, but I don't think the jokes themselves within those were well constructed enough for them to hold merit.
Especially now that musical comedy has become such an accessible thing. Like,
I just had a thought experience that I want to explore. Right, where
I witnessed it. It was adorable.
Let me compare Randy to Hannah Gadsby, which is once again not fair to Randy because he's like, God damn it, Hannah Gadsby is having the breakout moment of her career, and here I am, a puppet.
But he does acknowledge Hannah Gadsby in the special.
Yes,
and that seemed that's a friend
the
of his.
other famous Australian comedian.
Right, exactly. So go ahead.
But with that being said, so when I saw Nanette, which was Hannah Gadsby's like breakout stand-up, the jokes themselves within it pretty funny, right? But what sells Nanette is how it ends and the sort of thematic idea that she wanted to really leave the audience with.
Yeah.
So, if the show's jokes themselves and the storytelling a little bit suffers in order to get to that theme, fine. But it felt for like a large part of it that Randy was sort of like tiptoeing in the middle of it. Like, didn't commit enough to a theme and didn't commit enough to the jokes that was actually being said. So it just left Randy in this muddy water of not being able to identify what this special was really about.
Yeah, and that I think that's what is so safe, but also so interesting about this new style of comedy that we've been talking about, the evolution of comedy, and that is the thing that is on the forefront right now is this style of purposeful and intentional comedy that has a point that they're trying to make. And I think that was...
And not all comedy has to be that
No,
either.
not at all. But I think that why we were talking about Dave Chappelle is because he is one of the people that ushered that in and one of the people that brought that out.
And if Randy is going to do that, he needs to do that well.
Right.
It's fine if you tell straight up jokes for 2 hours. Like, nobody is asking you to deliver this thematic message. But if you're going to deliver a thematic message, well, then you got to execute that.
Okay, here's my sizzle serve. I actually think that in terms of the amount of times that I laughed and the things that I found funny, I think Randy Feltface actually is pretty comparable to Hannah Gadsby or Daniel Sloss or James Acaster. I think that where Randy lacks ultimately, and why this is a subpar special in comparison to Hannah Gadsby. Oh, 2-minute warning.
Hello.
2-minute warning.
Hello.
In comparison to the other people is because he does not quite have that purpose. And I don't need a sob story like he was talking about in reality TV.
Yeah.
It's just, I need you to say something if you're not going to be absolutely fall out of my seat funny.
Exactly.
So Were there any gold medal jokes for you?
I mean, it was just when he was looking down the aisle and
That
like
was
some of the
really- yeah.
physical manifestations. Like the best way right now after consuming this special, this is my opinion right now. It could change in the future. The best way I think to consume Randy, just watch some clips on YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you should watch a full special.
What's best of?
Because it felt like in this performance he was having a rough time filling in the time.
Yeah.
And it kind of hurt to watch at some point. However, some moments really hit well, so therefore, and what got me to watch the special was some clips on YouTube. So
Yeah.
I would honestly recommend that. I think Randy has a lot of potential, and I would love to see more puppet comedians or just like different interpretations to the art that is comedy in the future, as like in terms of like the apparatus that comedy is done, like Randy. Mac.
Randy has, just like you said, a lot of potential. The concept is there, and Heath is clearly smart, even though this special was not a good representation of what Randy, I think, is or could be.
Yeah.
So even though I have not seen it, I would recommend, if you were going to watch a special of Randy Feltface's, to go to the first one from 2018, even though we did not watch that. Because, one, that's the more popular one, but also because I can nearly guarantee that is a better exploration of the concept than this one, which already had an established concept.
What are we watching next time?
We're watching Dark Season 2, which is easy to say because we already watched Season 1. So Dark Season 2.
Hello.